Ladies and gentlemen, today I bring you the gripping account of TNT Flight 325, a flight that tested every limit of human endurance, procedure, and decision-making. This is the story of how a cargo aircraft, its crew, and a cascade of events combined into a harrowing saga that still commands attention. In the quiet hours of its departure, Flight 325 looked like any other scheduled cargo run, the airport lights glowing softly against the vast darkness of the night sky, where every shimmer of a lamp reflected on the polished fuselage of the aircraft as ground crews moved with mechanical precision, guiding trolleys, securing containers, and ensuring every pound of cargo was fastened exactly where it needed to be for balance and stability. While inside the cockpit, the pilots settled into their seats, adjusting straps, aligning their checklists, and methodically confirming the readiness of every crucial system from hydraulics to electrics, from communication channels to navigation routes, leaving no box unchecked, no switch overlooked. As the hum of auxiliary power filled the cabin with its steady reassurance, the weight of responsibility was familiar to them, a routine they had performed countless times. Yet each flight demanded the same concentration and vigilance as the last, because cargo or passengers, night or day, safety was always paramount. The airport itself was a hive of motion, though subdued under the curtain of darkness, as flashing beacons from other aircraft in the distance painted fleeting red and white streaks across the runway margins, while control towers monitored every movement with calm authority, issuing clearances and coordinating the intricate dance of machines taking off and landing, each depending on precision and timing. Flight 325 awaited its turn patiently, taxiing slowly toward the designated runway, its massive frame gliding almost effortlessly, as if the Earth itself yielded to its presence, while the pilots exchanged brief but important confirmations, running through takeoff speeds, fuel quantities, engine performance metrics, and emergency procedures. A script rehearsed, yet never diminished by repetition. When clearance came from air traffic control, the throttles were advanced forward with deliberate force, and the engines responded instantly with a thunderous roar, shaking the ground as the aircraft surged forward, acceleration pressing the crew back into their seats, the nose wheel rattling across the concrete, sparks of vibration echoing up through the frame until the speed reached that critical threshold where hesitation is no longer an option, where commitment to the skies becomes absolute. The nose lifted, the wheels parted from the earth, and the colossal machine rose into the sky, its landing lights slicing through the night as it climbed steadily, gear retracting smoothly, wings flexing slightly with the newfound freedom of lift. Everything about the departure radiated normalcy, efficiency, and control, every moment unfolding with the appearance of routine perfection, every sound and motion blending seamlessly into the practiced rhythm of aviation. And yet, hidden within that calm sequence of ordinary departure, destiny waited quietly, preparing to reveal that this flight would not remain just another uneventful journey, but one where both machine and human would be tested beyond their limits. Shortly after takeoff, something went awry. A single flicker of light across the control panel, the kind of warning that could so easily be dismissed as a temporary glitch. Yet in aviation, no detail is ever ignored, and the crew immediately turned their attention to the flashing indicator, cross-checking instruments, verifying whether it was an isolated anomaly or a sign of a deeper issue. Their voices calm but firm as they worked in unison to identify the source. The cockpit, once filled only with the steady hum of engines and the rhythmic clicks of switches, now carried an undercurrent of tension, a shift in atmosphere so subtle yet unmistakable, as the human mind senses when the ordinary has given way to the unknown. At first glance it might have seemed like a sensor misreading, an electronic hiccup caused by turbulence, or a minor system irregularity, but the longer the warning persisted, the less likely it appeared to be a passing inconvenience, and the more it resembled a signal of something growing beneath the surface. The pilots leaned on their training, methodically running through the relevant checklists, calling out each step as they verified system status, scanning dials, gauges, and digital readouts, ensuring no parameter was overlooked, no figure left unchecked. Because in these moments, procedure was their lifeline, the framework that turned uncertainty into manageable action. Every flick of a switch, every adjustment of throttle or control input carried weight, for each action might stabilize the aircraft or escalate the problem further. The flashing light was not alone for long. Other systems began to show subtle irregularities, not outright failures but enough to sow doubt. Conflicting messages between instruments that should normally align perfectly now contradicted one another, creating a puzzle in real time with no clear solution. The tension in the cockpit grew heavier with each passing second, not through panic but through the acute awareness that decisions had to be made correctly, because altitude was still being gained, speed was still climbing, and the demands of the aircraft did not pause to grant the crew extra time. They exchanged measured glances, reading one another as clearly as the instruments before them, balancing experience with instinct, caution with urgency. A single warning light had now become the first crack in the illusion of routine. a reminder that in aviation, the line between order and chaos is thin, and once crossed, it forces men and machines alike into a test of endurance. What began as a simple signal on a control panel was quickly proving to be the opening act of something far greater, a slow unraveling of certainty that hinted the aircraft, the systems, and the crew themselves were about to be pushed far beyond the ordinary bounds of flight. With more alarms sounding and conflicting readings flashing across the panels, the cockpit transformed from a place of structured calm into an arena of mounting uncertainty, where every second delivered new data, new contradictions, and new demands for action, forcing the crew to shift from routine operations into crisis management mode, a mental battlefield where training and instinct collided under the relentless pressure of time. One instrument suggested altitude was steady, while another implied a gradual drop. One system displayed stable fuel flow, yet a separate gauge hinted at irregular consumption. And this divergence created a storm of doubt, leaving the crew to wrestle with the question of which reading to trust. Knowing that one false assumption could cascade into catastrophe, the atmosphere grew heavier, not with noise or chaos, but with the intensity of thought. Every flicker of a warning light, amplified by the knowledge that the aircraft was thousands of feet in the air beyond the safety of the ground, reliant entirely on human judgment and mechanical integrity to continue forward. Manuals, procedures, and checklists had been memorized for situations like this. Yet the reality of multiple failures occurring simultaneously created scenarios no simulation could fully replicate, demanding the crew improvise within the narrow corridors of official procedure. They were trained to follow the logic of the system, but when the system itself delivered contradictions, logic became blurred, and decisions relied increasingly on human instinct, on subtle cues in the way the aircraft responded to small control adjustments, on the feel of the yoke, on the vibrations resonating through the fuselage, on the unspoken trust between captain and co-pilot forged through years of shared experience. The outside world remained silent, the dark night sky stretching endlessly around them, but inside the cockpit, the battle grew fiercer, pressure mounting with every second. The alarms refused to relent, the aircraft itself becoming both ally and adversary, a machine capable of survival, yet burdened with flaws that threatened to undo it. The crew spoke less now, their words short, clipped, purposeful, each syllable loaded with urgency, their minds processing scenarios at lightning speed, discarding what was impossible, narrowing down what remained, knowing that hesitation was as dangerous as error. At this stage, escalation was not about a single failure, but about the accumulation of small ones, a snowball rolling faster downhill, and the realization that the aircraft was edging toward its operational limit. The crew pressed forward, adjusting, recalibrating, struggling to stabilize a situation that was slipping further from certainty, and in that moment, they understood that this was no ordinary malfunction but a test of endurance that would demand every ounce of focus, skill, and resolve to overcome. At altitude, conditions worsened. The aircraft, once steady, now showing unmistakable signs of strain, as if the invisible weight of gravity and the relentless forces of physics were conspiring against the fragile balance holding it aloft. And what had begun as isolated irregularities had by now evolved into a cascading sequence of malfunctions that stretched both man and machine toward their breaking point. Hydraulic systems that should have provided smooth and precise control began to feel sluggish, their responses delayed by fractions of a second that in the realm of aviation felt like eternity, while electrical indicators wavered unpredictably, creating a confusing mosaic of warnings, errors, and contradictory signals that forced the crew into constant cross-checking just to maintain the most basic situational awareness. In such an environment, where each decision carried monumental consequences, the cockpit became a crucible of judgment, a place where the thin line between stability and disaster grew narrower with every passing moment. The strain on the aircraft was mirrored by the strain on its pilots, whose training, though extensive, had not prepared them for the sheer density of failures confronting them simultaneously. Yet they pressed forward with unyielding discipline, leaning on procedure when possible, and on instinct when procedure proved insufficient. Altitude, once a gift of safety, now became a double-edged sword, for while it provided room to maneuver, it also increased the risks of catastrophic failure should control be lost, and every adjustment of pitch or bank angle demanded calculations made under crushing pressure. The soundscape of the cockpit, filled with persistent alarms, warning tones, and the constant hum of engines laboring against the atmosphere, created a rhythm of urgency that never allowed the crew a moment's relief. Each new tone demanding acknowledgement, each flashing light insisting on attention. And still the pilots had to prioritize, deciding in real time which problems could be managed and which threatened to end the flight entirely. It was here, at altitude, where the true scale of the crisis revealed itself, not as a single catastrophic failure but as a relentless series of compounding problems, each one feeding into the next, like links in an unbreakable chain. And the crew realized that their survival depended not on solving everything but on containing enough to keep the aircraft in the sky. The weight of responsibility pressed upon them with unbearable force, yet they continued their hands steady on the controls. Their eyes darting across instruments, their minds racing to stay ahead of the failures, and though the aircraft teetered on the edge of chaos, the human resolve inside the cockpit refused to break, fighting every second against the merciless reality that at altitude there are no second chances. Only the will to endure and the determination to bring the machine back under control. But amidst the chaos, the strength of human resolve showed itself. For while machines faltered and systems betrayed their purpose, the crew refused to yield, summoning from within themselves a composure born of training, experience, and the deep awareness that surrender was never an option when lives, duty, and survival depended on their persistence. Their voices, though strained, carried clarity, each word a command or acknowledgement spoken with deliberate calm, for they knew that panic was the one adversary more dangerous than any technical failure, and so they maintained discipline, relying on their shared trust and understanding forged through countless hours in simulators and cockpits alike, where communication became their lifeline and unity their shield against despair. Every action was deliberate, every adjustment purposeful, as they leaned into procedures they had rehearsed again and again, yet also allowed instinct and judgment to guide them when the checklists no longer fit the escalating reality of multiple malfunctions. They knew that machines were designed with redundancy, with backups to preserve function when primary systems failed. Yet redundancy could not replace the human mind, the ability to interpret, adapt, and improvise under circumstances that no engineer could fully predict, and it was here that their resolve became the most critical system on board. Each flick of a switch, each recalibration of throttle, each recalculated heading reflected not just technical skill, but the sheer refusal to let failure define the outcome. And as the aircraft strained against its own vulnerabilities, the crew pressed forward with determination, unshaken by the mounting odds against them. In those tense moments, time seemed distorted minutes, stretching into eternities, every decision echoing with potential consequence, yet their ability to compartmentalize to focus only on the task at hand kept despair at bay, and it was this mental strength, this discipline under fire, that revealed the essence of human resolve. They pushed aside fear, though it lingered at the edges of thought, replacing it with action, calculation, an unwavering concentration, a demonstration that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. The cockpit became both battlefield and sanctuary, a place where men confronted the full fury of uncertainty with only their own willpower as the decisive weapon. And as the alarms persisted, as the aircraft trembled under strain, their refusal to yield proved stronger than the adversity pressing against them. Human resolve was not just a phrase, but a living force within that confined space, a testament that even when machines fail and circumstances spiral into chaos, it is the endurance of spirit, the steadiness of hand, and the determination to fight on that keeps hope alive and pushes the impossible closer to the realm of survival. At the journey's end, there was an outcome, and whether judged by survival, by damage, or by loss, that outcome carried within it a wealth of lessons. For every crisis in aviation becomes not only a moment of reckoning for those on board, but also a moment of reflection for the entire industry, a chance to examine what went wrong, what held firm, and what must change to ensure that future flights are safer than the one that endured the ordeal. The investigation that followed began with meticulous detail. Experts poring over every piece of evidence, retrieving data from the flight recorders, studying cockpit voice transcripts, and reconstructing the timeline second by second to understand not only the mechanical sequence of failures, but also the psychological and human factors that influenced each decision made under the relentless stress of the crisis. Engineers examined whether redundancy systems worked as designed or whether they were compromised by flaws that had escaped notice, while pilots and training authorities analyzed the crew's choices, weighing whether procedure had been followed, adapted, or abandoned, and why such decisions were taken in the heat of the moment when clarity is most clouded by pressure. What emerged from this scrutiny was not a simple tale of malfunction, but a complex web of interconnected issues, where design limitations, human response, and environmental conditions combined in a way that no single manual could fully anticipate. And from that web, investigators extracted insights to shape improvements in equipment, training, and operational guidelines. Lessons were drawn about the need for clearer alarm hierarchies, so that when multiple warnings erupted, crews could immediately identify which threat demanded priority. About the importance of refining simulators to better replicate cascading failures rather than isolated malfunctions, ensuring that pilots were prepared not just for textbook emergencies but for the chaotic reality of overlapping crises, and about the necessity of strengthening maintenance protocols to catch small irregularities before they had the chance to evolve into life-threatening events. Yet beyond the technical and procedural findings, the most profound lesson was human, a recognition that no matter how advanced an aircraft becomes, its fate in moments of crisis still rests heavily on the skill, resolve, and judgment of the crew entrusted with its command. and that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, their actions can mean the difference between tragedy and survival. Thus, the outcome of Flight 325, though forged in difficulty, became not only a story of endurance, but also a cornerstone of progress, ensuring that the risks endured that day would not be in vain, but would instead illuminate the path toward safer skies for all who follow. This was more than the story of TNT Flight 325-4 in aviation. Every incident becomes a mirror reflecting truths far greater than the fate of a single aircraft, and the lessons carved out of adversity extend beyond the moment, beyond the crew, and beyond the metal frame that carried the struggle, shaping an understanding that reaches into the core of safety, resilience, and human determination. Each investigation, each report, each detail pulled from data and testimony becomes a brick in the foundation of progress, ensuring that the ordeal is never forgotten but instead transformed into guidance that will protect future flights from facing the same peril. For the industry thrives on learning from the rare but defining moments when the limits of man and machine are exposed. Beyond one flight lies the recognition that aviation itself is built upon an unspoken pact, a trust shared between passengers, crews, engineers, and regulators. That every journey taken into the sky is supported by countless unseen hands, striving to make it safer than the one before. And Flight 325, through its hardship, became part of that unbroken chain of advancement. Pilots in training classrooms would later analyze the decisions made in the cockpit, drawing strength and awareness from the resolve shown under impossible conditions, while maintenance crews would study the mechanical findings, determined to ensure no oversight would ever again allow small faults to build into cascading crises, and designers would incorporate redundancy improvements into future models, embedding into steel and circuit boards the hard-won lessons purchased at such high cost. The memory of one flight does not vanish when the headlines fade, for it persists in procedures rewritten, in manuals updated, in simulator scenarios revised to reflect the brutal realism of overlapping emergencies, so that those who sit in the cockpit tomorrow will be armed with foresight that those of Flight 325 never had. It is this process of reflection and adaptation that allows aviation to remain one of the safest pursuits in human history, despite the enormity of the risks involved. And every time a crew confronts an alarm, a failure, or a storm, they are unknowingly beneficiaries of those who faced crises before them and refused to give up until the end. Thus, the significance of Flight 325 extends beyond its own struggle, becoming part of a larger story written across decades, where each test, each failure, and each act of resolve strengthens the invisible network of knowledge that allows millions to soar through the skies with trust and confidence. A testament that even when a single flight is pushed to its very limit, the endurance of its lessons will carry on far beyond